Well, an oversold flight, illegal connection, but one very happy daughter in Edmonton. So thanks for your forbearance here in letting me go earlier. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici parmi vous aujourd'hui, surtout dans un groupe de gens qui travaillent dans le contexte de leadership. C'est toujours bon d'être parmi des gens qui comprennent les genres de défis que plusieurs d'entre nous vivons ces jours-ci, and have the opportunity to be in a crowd who is full of people who understand what some of these challenges are and what some of the things are going forward. Je suis heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui et je tiens d'abord à remercier les responsables de Canadian Government Executive d'avoir organisé cet événement d'apprentissage. Cette activité nous donne aussi à tous une excellente occasion de souligner le rôle essentiel que jouent les fonctionnaires de l'administration fédérale, des provinces, des territoires et des municipalités pour faire du Canada un endroit où il fait bon vivre. En effet, nos organisations ont une incidence plus grande, plus marquée et plus durable sur la vie des Canadiens et des Canadiennes que n'importe quelle organisation du secteur privé. Public institutions have a broader, deeper, and long-lasting impact on the lives of Canadians than any other institution in the country, by far. Et cette relation solide entre les Canadiens et ces institutions publiques ne s'est pas instaurée du jour au lendemain. Elle a évolué et s'est développée depuis la création de notre pays. And I'd say this relationship of trust between public institutions and Canadian society is one that exists because of its public servants. And I've been a public servant for 2 different provincial governments, 3 if you include summer jobs at the Government of Ontario and the federal government. I've done it in 5 different jurisdictions in Canada. And it's the same everywhere in terms of what these principles are and how Canadians live them. While Canadian citizens place their trust in us to create and maintain the types of institutions that reflect their values, needs, and aspirations, we, as public servants, no matter what government we work for, no matter what public institution we work in, have a responsibility to ensure that those institutions, programs, and services are as strong and as good as they can be. And that responsibility goes not only to the heart of what we do, but it goes to the heart of what we are as institutions. And that, to me, is one of the great differences between public institutions and the private. That what we do is one thing that's very important, but what we are is something else that has an independent life of its own that matters enormously. And it's resulted in a range of activities that are unmatched in terms of the scope, the reach, and the impact that we have in the lives of Canadians. So a number of you probably woke up to an alarm clock radio this morning. When that alarm clock radio went off, it was federal public servants who were regulating both the airwaves that were being broadcast upon and the cultural content policy that determined what was on there. When you went for your first cup of coffee this morning, it was federal public servants that had negotiated the trade arrangements under which that coffee came into the country. The fact that you didn't think for 1 second about the safety of the water that you put into that coffee is a result of the great work of municipal public servants across this country. And there's almost nowhere you would go in this country where you wouldn't drink the water out of the tap without giving it a second thought. When you went to cook your sausage and eggs or whatever it is you had, it was public servants who were ensuring the safety of that food. When your child reminded you to pick them up at the library after school, they were telling you they were going to a place that was run either by provincial or municipal public servants. When your mom phoned you to remind you that you were to take her to the doctor's appointment later on, the fact that you didn't worry about the quality of that care, the fact that you didn't worry about the bill for that care, is about provincial public servants doing what they did. And then you drove on a road that was either municipally maintained or provincially maintained, and you got on your way to work. and you crossed a rail station or rail line, or you saw an airplane flying overhead that was being regulated for its safety by other public servants, sometimes provincial in some cases, sometimes federal. You saw a lot of people on the street. In Canada, more than any other country in the world, many of those people that you saw on the street are there because other public servants did the business of deciding that they should be in Canada under immigration policies. A bunch of other people you didn't see on the streets and wouldn't see on the streets are being hosted by other public servants in institutions with bars across them in different parts of the country. And if you were driving a General Motors car or a Chrysler car, you're driving a car that not only are the safety standards set by public servants, but that the only reason that those companies still exist in Canada is because public servants did the process of helping to provide them with the support they needed in 2008 when they were about to disappear. And all of these things have happened by the time you got your children to work, by the time children to school, or by the time you got to the office. None of your private sector friends can claim to be a part of an institution that has that much impact during their entire working day or week or month, let alone by the time you actually arrive to the office in the first place. That is a significant thing to be a part of. That is not a small set of things. Canadians turn instinctively, immediately, and without hesitation to public institutions to be a real part of the conversation in fixing and dealing with the challenges that they face. And you don't have to go to too many countries around the world until you notice that that's actually not true everywhere. In fact, you don't have to go very far at all. We watched the 2012 US presidential elections. We'll watch the 2014 US midterm elections. That public discourse is a very different conversation about how that society sees the role of public institutions as being or not being a solution to the challenges they face. I'm not saying that one is right or one is wrong. What I'm saying is that Canadians have developed the trust that is necessary in their public institutions, be they municipal, be they provincial, or be they federal, that they do not think a second time about inserting public institutions as a legitimate part of the debate about what the right solution is to those challenges. Doesn't mean that they always choose the provincial, federal, or municipal public institutions to be the solution, but we are always a part of that equation. And we're a part of that equation because we take on critical things day in and day out, and we get them right as frequently as anybody else in any business. And we have earned that trust. Mais il y a une réalité. Il y a une réalité qui dit que si nous allons entreprendre cette responsabilité dans le contexte de la société canadienne, que ça entraîne un devoir important de bien faire ce que nous allons faire, de ne pas tout simplement laisser les choses telles qu'elles sont un jour, ou telles qu'elles ont été il y a assez longtemps, mais de répondre à l'actualité, de répondre à ce qui est vrai, ce qui est réel aujourd'hui. Ce contexte nous sépare de bien d'autres institutions dans le monde, et c'est notre capacité de faire ceci qui assurera qu'on continuera de faire partie de ce débat, de ce discours public, concernant si ou non les institutions publiques feront vraiment partie de l'équation à résoudre les défis qui font face aux Canadiens. One of the things that I think is important, no matter what public service that you're working in, is that part of being a great public service means knowing and understanding what you need to do better and then going out and doing it. We like to say, as Canadians, that we have some of the best public services in the world. I'm not sure how people measure that, but having traveled around the world, what I would say is I'm very pleased with what I see when I get back to Canada. It doesn't mean there aren't great things going on in other places, but I've seen enough of them to know that there aren't a whole lot of places where people are doing extraordinarily greater things than we've ever imagined. In fact, I've talked to enough people who have come to see what we're doing to know that, in fact, we've got it more right than wrong, more frequently than not. But if we're going to call ourselves a great public service, whether or not you're working for the government of Ontario, the city of Mississauga, the town of Dryden, Ontario, la province du Québec, peu importe où vous travaillez, if we're going to call ourselves great public services, that brings with it the responsibility to know what it is that we need to do better and then to go out and do it. De toute évidence, nous devons toujours avoir une longueur d'avance. Nous devons régulièrement examiner nos systèmes et nos approches qui sont en place, parfois depuis fort longtemps. Et afin de continuer à servir les Canadiens de façon efficiente et avec efficacité, la mettre à jour lorsque c'est nécessaire. En bref, les besoins et attentes des Canadiens changent constamment et nous devons nous ajuster en conséquence. Ça, c'est notre devoir. Et c'est exactement ce que nous faisons dans le domaine des ressources humaines. We know that HR matters in organizations, all of those of you who are here today, which means that leadership in HR is vital. Today I want to talk to you about the leadership role that HR is playing and continues to play to ensure effective and efficient public service sector organizations in Canada. And obviously I will speak specifically to the federal government's experience. I want to say, you can weaken any great institution in this country through bad HR. And you can strengthen any organization in this country, public or private, with better HR, no matter how strong it starts out with. That's something that those of us in the HR world need to remember at all times. We are either weakening the organizations that we are there to support, or we are strengthening them. It's a binary question. If we're just leaving it the same way it would have been if we hadn't been there, then we should close our shops. If we're weakening it, we need to actually stop what we're doing to weakening it, and we actually need to figure out what it is to strengthen it. We need to understand what it means to strengthen it. Donc, parlons de progrès qui ont été faits. Parce que nous ne commençons pas d'un point dans le gouvernement fédéral où il n'y a rien que des défis. Nous avons vu au cours des années de grands défis. Et nous avons relevé ces défis. Et nous avons fait d'importants progrès. Donc, allons un peu dans l'explication de ce sont quoi certains de ces progrès. Je tiens à commencer par les progrès que nous avons réalisés à l'échelle fédérale en modernisant quelques-uns de nos principaux outils et approches dans le domaine de la gestion de personnes. Premièrement, le processus opérationnel commun des ressources humaines. Deuxièmement, un système normalisé de gestion de ressources humaines. Et troisièmement, un nouveau code de valeurs et d'éthique. Dans chaque cas, le gouvernement a reconnu qu'il y avait des problèmes qu'il fallait résoudre si nous voulions nous adapter à l'évolution des besoins de nos employés et des citoyens que nous servons. Prenez le processus des ressources humaines, par exemple. Jusqu'à maintenant, les ministères ont géré les mêmes processus différemment. En voici un exemple simple. Les ministères ont chacun leur propre formulaire de demande des ressources humaines pour commencer le travail relatif des processus des ressources humaines qui devraient être essentiellement semblables. Ce qui signifie que les gestionnaires et les professionnels des ressources humaines doivent réapprendre ces processus lorsqu'ils changent d'organisation. If you're in a smaller government, in a single department, that's not a big deal. We're 450,000 people in the federal public sector. Next biggest operation in the country is about 170,000, most of which are clerks at Loblaws. It is a completely different thing to actually have an organization that big and to have people relearning the same processes done differently 15 different times over the course of a career. The Common Human Resource Business Process rectifies this situation. It maps out the integrated end-to-end processes of HR, all from the manager's perspective. An incredible amount of work has been done. Over 80 organizations are on board, and we expect full implementation to take place by March 31st. That's what, 1 month and 6 days away. This is no small thing when you consider that over the past 2 years, 600 HR practitioners in our PE, that's our HR professionals occupational category, have moved to a new organization. But think about it. For the first time since July 1st, 1867, whether or not you're in Rankin Inlet, Corner Brook, Terrasse La Chaudière here in Gatineau, or in Canada Place in Edmonton, you can tell I'm from Edmonton, keep using the example, you'll use exactly the same processes to fill a position, to complete a performance agreement, to hire a student, or to effectively manage an employee back to work. It's simple enough if you're starting out last year, setting up your things from zero. But if you started out on July the 1st, 1867, developed into 80 departments and almost as many crown corporations, or 450,000 people, that is no small task. You can measure our inefficiency or you can measure our productivity gains by percentage points of GDP. That's how big we are. Collectively, that's how big all of us are in the public sector. Again, very few of our private sector colleagues can say anything similar. So what we do and what we don't do makes a difference not only to our institutions, but in the broader fabric of Canada's economy as well. How does what we're doing compare with the rest? Short answer is not at all. Why? Because we're doing a lousy job? No. Because nobody else in Canada can even come close to the volume that we're talking about here. That's true of your organizations as well. It doesn't matter if you're from a city, it doesn't matter if you're from a local government or regional government, if you're from a province or anybody else. The number of employers in this country that can claim that they're doing what you do at the scale at which you do it is very, very, very small. So we've taken on one of the hardest challenges you can imagine in the HR field in Canada, and we go live on April 1st in about 6 weeks. Departments are already starting to identify some of the benefits of delivering HR in a common and standardized fashion. This includes Public Works and Government Services Canada, which has reduced its departmental HR policies to 8 from 24, thanks to these processes. Another important accomplishment was the first release of the Standard Human Resources Management System, which was completed last October 31st. It's a standard which is PeopleSoft 9.1. It replaced the multiple systems and applications which varied from department to department and which have made our HR regime far too complex. So, if you're in the federal government, you're getting paid tomorrow, and it's all automated, and sort of no individual probably saw those numbers until they got printed out, except for the person who entered them. We used to have gymnasia about this big, in which we had armies of people sitting at desks with pencils and cue cards. And they would add by pencil every 2 weeks that you'd paid another $11.12 into the CPP. We had people all across the country doing that. And at the end of your retirement, they would pick up 30, 35 years worth of cards, add up the totals, and figure out what your pension was. The systems that we have in place were built off that history. And this past October 31st, for the first time since July 1st of 1867, we came to a point where we actually brought those things into one system that will work for the entire federal public sector. It used to take up to 6 months to have vacation entitlements follow you around when you move from one department to another. Now we'll be able to do that instantly. Same is true when it came to questions of security clearances that you used to have to do time and time again every time an employee moved. For those of you who have followed that process, it can take 1.5 years to do. You can move jobs more quickly than 1.5 years. You can actually get behind 2 or 3 security checks. I hope there's no security people in the room, but you can actually make that happen if you move often enough. Now that will stop. Third area of progress I want to highlight is our new values and ethics code for the public sector. Very easy way for me to get fired is to have a values and ethics labs. We're actually reasonably forgiving when it comes to acceptable failures in the world of performance. Every institution will have failures in performance from time to time. We have a certain built-in tolerance around those things, and we should, because no institution is perfect. It doesn't mean that we get to fail a lot. Doesn't mean that we get to fail repeatedly. Doesn't mean that we get to fail in a time when we shouldn't have. but we don't expect perfection on that front. But we have a very low tolerance for failures in values and ethics, and that should be the case in the public service. That's part of the reason why we did a new code for values and ethics in the public sector in the federal government. Among a number of new accountability measures, the government enacted the Public Service Disclosure Protection Act to better protect public servants and Canadians who disclose cases of wrongdoing in the federal public sector. This new regime, which dates from 2007, includes the entire public sector, such as separate agencies, crown corporations like Canada Post, and all the federal departments that you would know. The code contains clearer language for a better understanding of what the expected behaviors are that correspond to the values of the public sector. We talk about respect for democracy, respect for people, integrity, stewardship, excellence. We speak to the things that we hope people will be and expect people to be, rather than focusing on those things that we don't want them to be. It's an important characteristic of an institution to be able to say what it wants to be, not simply to be able, after the fact, to point out that that is not a behavior that we wanted. This is something that we worked at very hard, and that is a real part of many of our organization's day-to-day conversations. It reflects the fact, this approach does, that every deputy or chief executive needs to be firmly at the helm of all decisions that impact the delivery of their mandates, including the creation of values and ethics regime. Donc, j'aimerais maintenant parler, ayant parlé de certains progrès importants que nous avons vécus au cours des dernières années, de la prochaine épisode de notre futur dans la fonction publique. Et là, je dirais encore une fois, si nous voulons être une fonction publique exceptionnelle, il faut, numéro 1, comprendre ce qui doit être changé, et numéro 2, aller le faire. J'aimerais parler maintenant de 3 domaines sur lesquels nous nous concentrons nos efforts pour veiller à ce que la fonction publique soit la meilleure possible. Et permettez-moi de souligner à nouveau que notre devoir consiste, de nouveau, non seulement de voir ce qui doit être fait, mais ensuite d'aller le faire. Et c'est dans cet esprit que nos activités de modernisation sont entreprises. Commençons donc par examiner d'abord la gestion du rendement. Je pense que nous pouvons tous reconnaître que nous pouvons mieux faire dans ce domaine. I doubt that the federal government is the only government that has an issue ensuring that we do better performance management. In 1999, the government established a performance management program for all its senior leaders. This program is rigorous and has been recognized internationally as a best practice. The good news is the Directive on Performance Management, introduced by the government last May, lays the foundation for better results for all employees. At its heart, performance management is a tool for improving the work, performance, and productivity of individuals, teams, and organizations. All of us, as employees, need to be clear about 3 things, particularly in this fast-changing environment. Firstly, what do we expect of our staff? And as an employee, what does my manager expect of me? Quick quiz. If I asked you what you expect of your staff, and then he says I don't know them, went and met your staff and asked you what they expect of them, would you both be saying the same thing? The truth is that either we don't know too often, or worse yet, we know that we wouldn't be saying the same things. You cannot have good performance management if you are not giving the same answer to that question. And we know that far too frequently, either we aren't giving the same answers to those questions, or we don't have the confidence that we would need to have that we will get the same answers to that same question given to the 2 people who are part of that relationship. Second issue is, how are we doing in relation to those expectations? Again, we may have an idea in our head. Have we talked to people about what that means and where we believe they sit in relation to those expectations? And again, if as a stranger I went and talked to your staff, having heard you tell me what you think of their performance, and I asked them, would they or would they not give me the same answer? I will raise my hand as saying, I don't want you to come into my organization and do that. Because as much as I have tried at different points in time, I know that I have work to do on that front. You cannot have great performance management if you're getting two different answers to that same question. And then the third question is, what are we doing with the results of that assessment? It's fine to know that you're doing a great job. It's fine to know that there's work that needs to be done. It's fine to know that it's so far off the track that it isn't going to get fixed. But none of that will matter at all, and none of the effort that went into that will produce any value whatsoever if you don't then do something with it. That part is something that we need to do better. So starting April 1st of this year, every employee in the core public administration on the federal side will be required to have a performance agreement. This performance agreement is going to be developed collaboratively between managers and employees, and it's a key part of ensuring performance will be fair, consistent, and rigorous across all departments. It will establish performance expectations that clearly identify what the employee is expected to achieve and how he or she is expected to achieve it. It will ensure follow-through with direction, coaching, training, and other supports to help employee achieve performance expectations and longer career development goals. So I talked earlier about the system that we're going to bring in that will track our HR stuff. We will know if you had an employee last year who needed some work, we will be able to track whether or not you actually did that work to support them. We will be able to find out if we have training programs that can help you as a manager or you as an employee meet those expectations. These are things that we're going to do systemically and do much better. I would say, in terms of performance management, that one of the most important questions that I ask any group in terms of getting the answers I think that are important to us is, have you or have you not heard often enough in the last year that you're doing a good or a great job? Because we know that Canadians, and no matter what citizens you're serving, they would say the same thing. They trust the services you provide. They trust them because you're doing a good job. We can't be doing that if we don't have the vast majority of our employees who are doing a good or a great job. Statistically speaking, we figure it's got to be at least somewhere around 75%. Yet I've never been to a room yet where 75% of the people who put up their hands say, when I ask the question, have enough of you heard, or how many of you have heard this past year, that often enough, that you're doing a good or a great job. Interesting, in the world of performance management, people want to jump immediately to the back end of it, which is the stuff that isn't working out. Our biggest productivity gains will come from recognizing that vast majority of our folks are doing a good or great job and actually telling them that. There will be other conversations to be had, but that right there is the biggest single productivity gain that we will get. The others are important, but the scale pales in comparison. Another thing that we're going to work on this year is our current disability management system. This system has remained virtually unchanged for a number of decades, which is the polite way of saying that part of it came in place in 1919, the other part of it came into place in 1923, and some of it got codified in 1968 or thereabouts. When we put our current system into place, it was illegal for women to work in the federal public service. And it shouldn't be surprising then that the system that is based in that time frame doesn't work very well for a 21st century organization where over half of our employees are women, where family needs and other issues are very different than they were in 1923 and 1919 when we put the original foundation pieces into place. When we had the original disability plan set up, the concept of mental health in the workplace was not a part of anyone's vocabulary. The types of plans that were put in place were great at dealing with industrial injuries. If you twisted your back or broke your leg or did something like that, it wasn't bad at getting you back to doing the type of work that you were doing before. But depression was not a conversation that anybody had in the workplace or in many other parts of society when we put this plan in place in 1971. In 1971, the prognosis if you got cancer was that you had a relatively short time to live in most instances, and if you were in your working life, the probability of you getting back to work was relatively low. Today, many people have cancers, have heart disease, have other very serious illnesses, and come back and have long and successful careers after those bouts of illness. Today, 50% of the claims that we have are related to mental illness, not traditional industrial injuries. And yet we have a plan that is designed in a time when none of those things were part of anybody's vocabulary. So it's time for us in the federal system to actually take a look at the differences between what is needed and what exists today in the reality and the structures that we have in place to deal with them. And that is the next big thing that we will be taking on. The system we have doesn't work for anyone. 65% of our staff would not make it to the date that is required to pay your own salary till you get into our disability plan. It takes 13 weeks to do that. 65% of our staff would have to go without salary in order to get there. It means that a 28-year-old and a 58-year-old with exactly the same illness, requiring exactly the same amount of time off, will face radically different circumstances as they go through that on a financial basis. That's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for the staff. It's not a good thing for the organization. It's just not a good thing. Similarly, though, what they also share is we have a system that is not designed at all to get people back to work. It was designed 40 years ago when basically when you got on that, you were either going to be back in 3 or 4 weeks after a broken leg or something similar to that, or you weren't coming back at all. The system we have in place isn't even designed to count the number of people who come back to work. This is in an economy where every single one of us is looking at the same graduates, the same qualified, capable people. Why? Because we can't find them. Why? Because Canada's labor force is shrinking. And the types of workers that we're looking for are very specialized, capable people that you don't just find everywhere. So when you've found them, when you need them, when they want to return to work, and we have a system that creates barriers for them getting back, that is not good for anyone. The final thing that we'll talk about is the question again of some of the common human resource business processes that I've talked to a little bit earlier. We still have a fair bit of work to do there. These are areas where we spend more time and effort than almost any other organization out there in the country dealing with the types of issues we do. That'll probably always be the case, because we have to deal with a set of issues in the world of HR that you don't have to face in a lot of different places. There are very good reasons for many of the things that we have in place in terms of systems, in terms of rules, in terms of values, in terms of ethics. But the amount of time and effort that we put in to making sure that we deliver on those things is not something that we can simply leave as is today. We have a number of systems, we have a number of approaches, we have a number of institutions and organizations that have developed over time, all of which we deliver energy and effort into. But we need now to actually think through what it is that we're going to do to figure out whether or not we're using the right amount of resources in each of those areas. All of these things come back, I think, to the key question. If you want to be or the key observation, if you want to be a great public service, you have to see what you can do better. And then you actually have to go and do that. J'espère que les exemples que j'ai utilisés aujourd'hui ont illustré ce point et l'importance. Je voudrais ajouter, en tant que dirigeant de nos organisations, nous occupons tous une position privilégiée. Nous travaillons dans quelques-unes des institutions les plus fiables au pays. De nouveau, que ce soit au niveau municipal, régional, provincial ou fédéral, nous travaillons tous dans quelques-unes des institutions les plus fiables au pays. Des institutions auxquelles les Canadiens et les Canadiennes ont recours jour après jour pour obtenir des programmes et des services essentiels. And if we're to continue to meet the needs and expectations of Canadians, we must deal directly with those issues that need our attention. And allow me to reemphasize again that this group of people, public servants have earned this trust of Canadians generation after generation after generation. And we are heading into a world in which many of the tools that we use are changing significantly, but the expectations of Canadians that public institutions will be a part of that future remains constant. So our job is to get this right. And we need to get it right. Canadians expect nothing less. And you only have to travel around the world to see where those public institutions do not play the roles that they have been assigned well, to understand the impact that it has on the competitivity of that nation against others. I'm confident that we can build on our recent accomplishments to deliver even better results for Canadians. Because as public servants, excellence is not only our goal, it's our obligation to those that we serve across this country. Merci beaucoup.